humanity to reset its values and way of life. And I quote one of the writers who also mentioned that we will not go back to normal. Normal never works. In other words, pre-pandemic, we assumed that we were living in a normal life. This writer is suggesting that that wasn't normal. As indicated here, that our coronavirus existence was not normal, except that we had normalized greed, inequity, extortion, depletion, extraction, disconnection, confusion, rage, hoarding, hate, and lack. The writer went further to say, we should not long to return to pre-coronavirus existence. We are being given the opportunity to stitch a new garment, one that fits all of humanity and nature. So here we have two perspectives. One asking for reset in our values. The other one statement is saying we should take it as an opportunity to reset our values. The question is, how do we do that? How do we, if we assume or if we agree that this is how to address future pandemics, is to reset our values. What values? What's the next paradigm? Now, as I said earlier, to defeat pandemics, we have to act like pandemic. Pandemic does not recognize geographical border, and it doesn't recognize genealogical border. So it's counterintuitive, because usually when you are attacking an enemy, you do the opposite of what the enemy is doing. My paper is suggesting that you don't do the opposite, but act like the enemy, which means, particularly mentally, we should not have geography. We shouldn't have genealogical border in our mindset. That brings the next question. What kind of mindset that will remove those two borders? And that's where Ubuntu comes in. But before we do that, it's important to highlight that previous pandemics, or at least previous diseases, were not eradicated through medicine alone. In fact, as far as Zacharias stated, the eradication of smallpox is a story that is only partly about science and mostly about extraordinary cooperation. So this is the gold standard. This is the gold standard. But we know the gold standard, which is cooperation, which is solidarity. But how do we develop a mindset that will help us undergo the necessary re-evaluation of our way of life? And I must emphasize here that when we talk about pandemics, we are not just talking about diseases. Climate change is a pandemic. Climate change has no border. It affects Africa, affects Europe, affects Asia, just like coronavirus. Inequality and poverty affects all parts of the world. Even in Europe, in America, there is high inequality and poverty. So it's not just the usual suspect, which is the Southern Hemisphere, particularly in Africa. Hence, people talk more about global development rather than its development. So now, experts call for solidarity and collaboration, and there are attempts to establish that. But my argument here is that this attempt to build solidarity and collaboration to address climate change or coronavirus, it is done within a particular paradigm. In other words, it's within a particular context. And this context, these contexts are economic contexts and political contexts. And these contexts are inimical to solidarity. This paradigm of rational choice or rational action theory, national partiality and identity politics are not in sync with the idea of global solidarity and collaboration. So in as much as scholars, policymakers, civil society continue to ask for solidarity to address climate change, for example, to talk about dealing with poverty and inequality. All these attempts are done within these two contexts. And these two contexts, as I emphasize, they don't sit well with global solidarity and collaboration. Hence, you have one step forward and two steps backwards over the last 2 or 3 decades in trying to address climate change. So this paradigm needs to change. The mindset has to change, not within this neoliberal identity politics context. So let's look at deeper into the economic context, hence the rational action. The rational action is built on particular assumption of human nature and tendencies which are viewed as universal and therefore appropriate for building a system of economic and international engagement. So, because it is assumed that a typical individual or a typical human focus on self-interest, therefore, the best way to influence the behavior of a human being is to adopt self-interest paradigm. And it is only when you use the self-interest paradigm that you will be able to control and guide people. Now, yes, self-interest is important factor in the way every individual behaves, but it is an emotional characteristic of human nature. But it's not the only characteristic, it's not the only emotion. Other emotions include compassion, empathy, sympathy, altruism, and cooperation. In other words, either of these emotions could have been used to build an economic system. Either of these could have been used to build an economic system and political system. But by design or by default, one of the emotions became very important, and hence we use it around the globe to build our economic system. Now, there are certain assumptions, I'm not going to spend time on them, but only to highlight them. And some of the principles of rational action which guide economic engagement and political engagement are based on some key principles. These principles are actors pursue goals. These goals are reflect actors perceived self-interest. So wherever the action take COVID-19 pandemic, are designed in recognition that most policies have to reflect. Imagine if policymakers assume the emotions that will guide people with the sympathy and compassion, a different policy would have been enacted. But no, it wasn't. So this is one example of those principles. How do we control panic buying? It's not to appeal to societal interests, but to appeal to selfish interests. And to say, for example, if you get involved in panic buying, next time you come to the shop, you will not find any. There is no talk about saying, refer to the community, the society, but rather refer to yourself. The consequences, what would happen if you get involved in panic buying. So it's just appealing to one emotion. There's no appeal to other emotions that we mentioned earlier. And this is simply because the individual is seen as the unit of analysis, not the society. The last point I need to emphasize, which is the basis of rational choice and rational action, is the assumption of availability of extensive information on which individuals make decisions. Despite the fact that over the decades, experts, especially economists, have informed us that if we're going to make a decision based on information available, these kind of decisions are only optimized, but cannot be maximized, simply because the information might not be available, or it will be obsolete by the time we made the decision. So the rational action theory, the rational choice paradigm, and even the idea of rationality has been questioned. Psychologists argue that rationality is making decision after examining all the facts. And we all know facts can be interpreted in different ways. Emotion can influence the way we interpret facts. So psychologists concluded that rationality is unhelpful in the long. It could appear the appropriate way to make decisions in the short run, but in the long run, psychologists argue that rationality is unhelpful in the long run, and partly because of the information and the interpretation of the availability of information, and also the interpretation of the information. But there we have it. These are what guides our daily behaviors, simply because we are culturalized to use those behaviors. Now, how do we express this? How does this rational choice and rational action demonstrate itself during the COVID-19 pandemic. One of them is withholding information about human-to-human transmission of coronavirus by the Chinese authorities. So here you see rational action as at play, interest, protection of the image. So rather than tell humanity, that's the proof of it. Or if it, rather than tell humanity that this virus can be transmitted from human to human, that information was withheld for selfish interests. Intercountry competition for personal protective equipment. That's another example of rational choice or rational action underpinned by self-interest. Intra-country competition, and particularly in the United States, you have the 50 states competing against each other for selfish interests during pandemic. And it is even worse. The federal government in the United States were competing with the states. There were a report of consignment of PPEs that were hijacked by the federal government before it reached before it left the country. So at individual level, you have panic buying by actors and organizations, withholding personal information for use for test, track, and trace, failure to use face masks. People, even as we speak, there are people for their own selfish interests. They say it's their fundamental human rights. One wonders what rights a person would have when humanity is facing existential challenge. So here we are talking about border. So rather than acting like pandemic to remove the border, individuals are using the border to protect what they call their human rights. Nation states were also acting as individuals. There is a case in the beginning of the pandemic. British government refused to accept an offer from the European community to collaborate in order to buy PPE and ventilators in bulk. And the reason is largely because Britain haven't left European political argument that they are now independent and they will make their own decision. So much about global solidarity and collaboration. Now, this is within the context of identity politics as well as rational action theory, self-interest. So, in a nutshell, we can see now how the economic paradigm is a major obstacle to building solidarity and collaboration during pandemic. This is not to say rational action theory is not a valid argument. Rational action theory, rational choice has been responsible for tremendous economic development and industrialization. wasn't to do with pandemic. So for each paradigm, you will find a benefit. So when you have a different context, you need a different paradigm. That reminds me of a quote popularly attributed to Albert Einstein that says, you cannot solve a problem using the mindset that created the problem in the first place. Most of the pandemics that the world is facing is man-made. Climate change is man-made. Encroaching into animal kingdom, probably we wouldn't have coronavirus. So the more we deplete the environment, the more other diseases will be created. And that's what experts are telling us. Of recent, we see vaccine nationality. And this is another indication where latest figures say only about 2 or 4% of Africans have access to COVID vaccine. Some countries are holding the vaccine. That operates within that paradigm of selfish interest. They talk about collaboration and solidarity, but it's becoming difficult for them to actualize it. And the reason is not that they don't wish Africa well, they do. Difficult to change, to walk the talk. It's difficult to walk the talk and requires a different paradigm. Now, we've seen the economic perspective. What about the political perspective? There are two dimensions of political content. One is national partiality. National partiality is a situation where a nation is justified or obliged to favor its own citizens. And that is coming from the moral theory of it makes sense for you to look after your family before thinking of other people's family. That makes sense. So that's what national partiality is. And another argument for national partiality is that it's a kind of division of labor. Each country should look after its own citizen, and that makes it easier for the to manage the global citizens. So every nation is given a responsibility to look after its own citizens. That makes sense, as I've said, referring to the analogy of the family. It only makes sense in the absence of pandemic. So one can apply it to poverty and inequality. If you say, for example, that you only look after your family during poverty, but I quote one of the African proverbs that if your neighbor's children are hungry, your chickens are not safe. So in the absence of hunger, your chickens, when there is hunger in the town, your chickens are not safe. And this is exactly the situation the world is facing with climate change and coronavirus. So national partiality doesn't operate under this context. But it's even worse when we start talking about identity politics. Identity politics is a kind of exaggeration of national partiality, where nation states, especially their leaders, see themselves as special, and therefore they don't need to cooperate and show solidarity with anybody because they are so exceptional. When it comes to COVID-19, the virus is fake. Later on, they move on to say the virus will not reach them because they are so exceptional. And later on say, well, we can deal with it. This exceptionalism is demonstrated by failure to learn lessons from China, South Korea, New Zealand, and Taiwan. These are countries that have successfully demonstrated that the virus can be curtailed through certain behaviors. But if you come to the West, because of exceptionalism, some think that that is not possible. They don't believe in it. And some may use in South Asia dealing with the virus doesn't exist in the West. Therefore, to apply that methodology doesn't work. Now, who is talking about culture when the human existence is at stake? So this is a kind of identity politics. So you can see resistance to global solidarity is to be expected when political or cultural or economic goal is perceived to be threatened by solidarity and collaboration. This is particularly the case with climate emergency. Many countries resist change in their mindset, in their approach to take a collaborative effort with the global community because they have economic goal. Some countries say, well, you are the source of the pollution. Now we are trying to develop. You are asking us to change in order to address climate. Now, how can you develop when the earth itself is at stake? What development is that? So we have indication of identity politics, but just quickly to elaborate on this identity politics is a social and social and political psychologists view identity as a self-conception of membership of a group. Here, the definition of self and others is essential in crafting foreign policy towards others or global cooperation. The assumption here is that members share similar conception. So again, I go back to what I said earlier. Coronavirus doesn't understand who you are. It doesn't understand whether you are a Nigerian, an Ethiopian, a German, an American. It doesn't. So you can define yourself however you want to define yourself, but the enemy doesn't know who you are as separate from other people. I mean, you can see the irrationality of rational action theory. Are all the same, and you are saying to the enemy, the enemy that you are different. Let's see who wins. The climate change doesn't know geography; it affects the whole globe. So you can pretend that Africa is different from Europe. You can have that in your mindset, but the climate Emergency doesn't recognize it. Coronavirus doesn't recognize it. Wouldn't it be better to behave like climate change, to behave like coronavirus? So this is the essence of my paper. So experts tell us that identity is a mental construct, and that's mindset I'm talking about, that both describes and prescribes, the emphasis on prescription, on how the actor should think, feel, evaluate, and ultimately behave in a group relevant situation. So you consider the world as one group, and how does your identity relate to the whole human race? Now, I said earlier on that the aim of this paper, one of the aim of this paper is to go back to history. Why history? Richard Haas, the president of the Council of Foreign Relations, in his recent book, The History of the World, said history can help us in explaining people, society, or country. It can also help us to explain where we are at the moment, how we got here, and also how we learn lessons. So it is important for us to go back to history. So what does history tell us when it comes to emergency and survival? Now let's go back to the evolution of human species. The history of evolution has predisposed humans to work collaboratively, and cooperation attracts equal rewards. That's what experts tell us, that this is how human species and also animal species used to be. In fact, Darwin argued that sharing and compassion was the basis of success for human species. So we are talking history here. And he went further to argue, quoted by Johnson, that those communities which included the greatest number of the most sympathetic members will flourish best and rear the greatest number of offspring. So our basic history told us that the formation of early governments in humanity was based on collaboration. When people realize, or human beings realize, individualistic pursuit of one animal or protecting oneself from fellow human doesn't work. So people decided to cooperate in hunting, in protecting themselves. So that's the history. That's how the survival came about. But today, the advent of pandemics, we are not doing what our forefathers have done. Instead, each one is trying to fight each other, or at least ignore each other. And in fact, some scholars question whether this rationality, which is self-interest, is a distinctive human trait. It's not necessary, because we look at the history. So this brings us to Ubuntu. Now, Ubuntu, some of you are already familiar with it, but Ubuntu is a concept that I use to explain African philosophy. Now, my argument is that we should use the term just to explain the philosophy, rather than to assume that Ubuntu is a term that is widely used in sub-Saharan Africa. But even though the term is restricted to Southern Africa, as I will demonstrate later, but actually the essence of the philosophy is shared across sub-Saharan Africa, even though they may be using a different term. So under Ubuntu solidarity, under rational action theory, as we see, the characteristic is selfishness or self-service, individualism, competition, utility maximization, and identity politics. So this is to contrast it with what Ubuntu is. Ubuntu is a philosophical thought system, but valued for its instrumental contribution to judgment and decision making. So it helps develop a mindset when you make a decision. Rational action theory also is the same. The basis of rational action theory is your self-interest. So when you make judgment about whether to participate, to collaborate in collaboration, in solidarity, building solidarity, what do? You look at self-interest first. Ubuntu, on the other hand, is saying you look at humanity. And I would demonstrate how this is reflected in our daily language in Africa. For relationships and strategy for survival, just similar to what Darwin was talking about. And the man was saying that whether it is a critical issue that needs to be interpreted or a problem that needs to be solved, Ubuntu is invariably invoked as a scale for weighing good versus bad, right versus wrong, just versus unjust. So that's how Ubuntu is used. It's a philosophical approach in making decisions. Now, as I said, humanness is at the center of the philosophy of the African philosophy. Now, it's considered as the most noble ideal to be aspired by an African. And humanness is bestowed on one by fellow humans. One doesn't become a human being automatically without a fellow person saying you are human. In other words, you have to earn it. It's not based on Kantian philosophy, which is sentience, that you have, the moment you have a feeling and then you become human biologically. According to Ubuntu, you don't achieve absolute humanness without demonstrating it. And how do you achieve absolute humanness? Is through self and social consciousness, through solidarity, acceptance, care, interconnectedness, consensus, harmony, generosity, and friendliness, among others. So it's not automatically you achieve certain moral status of being a human being as far as Ubuntu is concerned. You have to demonstrate it, and you are given some guidelines on how to do it. And in typical African tradition in the past, not necessarily at present, because basically Africa now has become a rationalist kind of society. But if we read through our history, we refer back to stories. This description fits what we read, what we are told about how to become a good member of a family or a good member of a community. These are what is expected. And even after the independence, our founding fathers, after the independence, they tried to include those principles inside our curriculum of education. And how did they do that? Unlike now, we train and educate people to find jobs and to become wealthy. Our founding fathers, if we read their history and look at what their utterances, the educational system was based on nation building. So that's how they try to impart Ubuntu in their philosophy of education, but it's no longer the case now. Go to any university, go to any educational establishment, the emphasis is about self, how to get qualification in order to find a job. It's all about you. That's not the intention of the founding fathers. And the founding fathers found this idea from the moral philosophy of what is it mean to be educated. To be educated, others have to tell you you are educated. It is not you, it's not a certificate, but how would others know you are educated? They will know you are educated by your behavior, not your certificate. So they bestow qualification on you, your community bestow qualification on you. That's the African way. But our education system is not like that, no more. How do we notice? As I said, you know, Ubuntu is no more in the real sense, but you find it in languages. So, for example, how do we praise people? And do we praise people based on individualistically or in a different way? Now, here are some examples. By the way, anthropologists have divided African languages into 6. And so one of those languages is Koshan, which is in the Southern Africa. And when they want to say, that they want to praise somebody, the Guni people, or the Guni language, they say, you Ubuntu, which means, hey, you're already familiar with, which is Hausa and Fulfulde. Now, a Hausa man, if a Hausa man wants to praise you, whoever you are, regardless of your language or religion or your racial grouping, they could say this, yana da mutunci. In other words, you have a kind of desirable behavior or desirable personality. And the mutunci comes from the word mutum. And mutum is human being. And you can see similarity between the Koshan way of praising and the Hausa way of praising a person. So even praising a person is within the humanness context. The humanness context that you can relate to the person as a human being. So if you are not a human being, a houseman will say baka da mutunci. Now, to tell you baka da mutunci, it means you do not have characteristic of a human. It's almost like saying you are not a human. And this is found in the language. But that is not to say this is how people behave, but it's there in the language. I say this is a legacy of Ubuntu. It's a legacy of Ubuntu. And we have the Fulani people who say, oh, the Pulaku. And to say somebody, to say to somebody, oh, the Pulaku, this Pulaku means a characteristic of a Fulani person. And the moment you are able to demonstrate that characteristic, then they relate to you. You become part of them. It means without Pulaku, you are not Fulani. If you have Pulaku, then you become part of them, which is also a kind of desirable behavior. So these are the relics or legacies of Ubuntu in the language. The behavior might be different, but this is what it is. And that's what the philosophers are telling us. And we can also see how it is used or how it is termed. So not even in Southern Africa, it's not every tribe call it Ubuntu. For instance, in Tanzania, they call it Bantu. In Zulu tribe, they call it Abantu. In Sesotho, in South Africa, they call it Batho. Namibia, they call it Avandu. And then in Central Africa, they call it Ngumtu or Udubuntu or Kubuntu in Central Africa. East Africans, especially the Swahili, they call it Wasi. Now, these are terms that are similar phonetically. And of course, in Hausa, you call it Mutunchi, which is the same as Ubuntu. In Zimbabwe, they call it or Ubukosi. And the Fulanis call it Pulaku. And in Senegal, they have the concept of Teranga, which is where people cooperate and develop solidarity. This cut across East, West Africa, Central Africa, and South Africa is the same thing. The center is communality. But of course, but the philosophy, you can see it from the quotation of African leaders, early African leaders. For instance, the latest Steve Biko, when he was struggling against apartheid, made this statement: we regard our living together not as an unfortunate mishap warranting endless competition among us, but as a deliberate brothers and sisters jointly involved in the quest for a composite answer to the varied problems of life. He went further to say, hence, in all we do, we always place man, you see, human being first. Everything starts with a human being. And hence all our action is usually joint community-oriented action rather than individualism, which is the hallmark of capitalist approach. Basically, he's talking about rational action theory. And Bishop Desmond Tutu also has this quotation. He said, social harmony is for us the summum bonum. It is good. Everything that undermines this sought after good is to be avoided like a plague. Then we have another quotation by one of the scholars of Ubuntu. And he has this interesting quotation about the need, because many people keep talking that the Ubuntu is this empowering people. It is, but Ubuntu is neither a capitalist or a communist. Ubuntu doesn't necessarily say you shouldn't pursue individualistic goal. And that's what it's trying to emphasize. We say, why I ought to help others appeals not to the fact that it would likely helping others would be good for you, or at least not merely to this fact, but to the fact that it will likely be good for them. So it's not about sacrificing oneself to help others. That's not what Ubuntu is, because this is the whole controversy about Ubuntu. Many people who don't understand it, they think people have to sacrifice their self-interest. That is not. This is what maybe closely we define can be explained as enlightened self-interest. That's what Ubuntu tried, but it's not exactly enlightened self-interest. It's beyond that because of the emphasis. It's not only Africans will agree with the word Ubuntu. Look at a statement by George Barnshaw, an Irish philosopher. He said, now that we have learned to fly in the air, like birds and dive in the sea like fish. Only one thing remains: to learn to live on the earth like humans. And Ubuntu people will adopt George Bernard Shaw as an African, because this is what Africans is. Everything you do, if you are not human, it's nothing as far as the philosophy is concerned. Being human is the ultimate goal. And that's why Ubuntu philosophers say it's a philosophy of becoming. In other words, you don't become just human by just being biologically human. You have to earn it, and you have to keep struggling in order to achieve that moral status. And some examples of how Ubuntu is inculcated. Some people of certain age, like myself, we can remember how we used to play in the playground, on the playground. This is traditional Southern African Ubuntu ceremony, showing how kids are inculcated with that kind of culture. They grow up with knowing that they are all one and the same. I'm not gonna go on this. I've said enough about Ubuntu. Just to emphasize the humanness or the moral status, I've already emphasized it much earlier, but just to make a few comments. Every human and non-human have moral status, not because of the sentience or telos of being alone, but also because of the relational capacity. So acquisition of humanness is not through sentience, which means the feeling of pain or experience of pleasure, because that's what sentience is about. It's not only about purpose, which is the telos, the Greek term for telos, but also having got the sentience and telos, you also have to demonstrate a relationship, and that's where you need to have this compassion relation to other people. So it's not just being a human being because you are different from an animal. You can feel pain and you can experience pleasure, which is sentience, but then you have a purpose. And that purpose also, you have to go beyond living a purpose to relate to other fellow human beings, to become a one. And that is a task of becoming. And so is Ubuntu behavior possible? Now here is the answer. It is possible, because here are some examples during COVID-19. Consigning of face masks from Japan to Wuhan, for example. Some of you who know history between the Japanese and the Chinese, they are not historically during the war. But this was put aside during pandemics. The Germans treating Italian patients in German hospital. So there was no border there. There was no border, because when Italians were facing high rate of infection and a lot of people dying in Europe, actually Italians suffered the most from COVID. But they were moved to Germany for treatment. So there was no border there. And that's the argument I was making. And also to suggest that Ubuntu-like behavior is possible. Intra-agency cooperation across development agencies and NGOs was widely reported. European government paying to save jobs. So here you don't have neoliberal rational action theory controlling the economy. Most European countries, and even America, have become almost like a statist economy, like a developmental economy, government playing a major role in the economy simply because they want to save jobs, writing blank checks. Those are Ubuntu-like behavior where you are not ideologically wedded to selfish interests, but common interests. And that's what Ubuntu is emphasizing. Not about selfish interest, but common interest across humanity. So we have seen some glimpses of Ubuntu. We can apply the same thing when it comes to climate change, but it requires a paradigm shift. And we'll see how other examples there, business donating their premises and money to support COVID, business converting their manufacturing plants to produce PPE and ventilators, individuals participating as guinea pigs to test vaccine, individual donating blood plasma to help find therapies. These are all Ubuntu-like behavior, different from rational choice behavior, selfish interest behavior. So it can be done when it comes to poverty, inequality, and climate change. So these are a rough contrast between Ubuntu and rational action. So in rational action, identity based on self, focus on doing, competition, self-interest, utility maximization, and also self-interest as motivation and guide to human action. Identity is not based on biological self, but based on humanness, which is acquired through specific behavior, particularly solidarity. Ubuntu focuses on being rather than doing, and also on becoming, solidarity, cooperation, harmony, and for motives and action. So that these are the two contrasts if we want to change our paradigm. But how do we go about doing it? To do it, to develop this solidarity and collaboration, we have to reframe or frame self a national construct. No other or self identity during pandemic. So the concept of self ceases to exist. The concept of nationalism ceases to exist temporarily during pandemic until you are able to resolve the issue. The new identity will be humanity. That's within the concept of Ubuntu. People or nation state will cease to be considered as human if they do not demonstrate the behavior that qualifies them as human. In other words, if you don't collaborate, because according to Ubuntu, humanity is bestowed on you. You don't decide that you are human. It's the same thing. The same argument can be made. A nation can be considered a pariah if that nation doesn't behave in order to save the planet or to save humanity. To use COVID adage, I am negative because you are negative. In other words, I am positive even though I'm negative because you are positive. So that's what Ubuntu will argue. Or you could say I'm vaccinated if you are vaccinated. Even if I'm vaccinated, if you are not vaccinated, then I consider myself unvaccinated because we depend on each other economically, at least in globalized world. So in conclusion, when rights and interests are at stake across all nations, there is a moral case for shared nationalism unless a country is prepared to hermetically seal itself off from the rest of the world, which is not possible, especially with climate change. You could isolate yourself from poverty, probably, but not from climate change, not from coronavirus. So thank you very much. I stop here, and I will welcome feedback through my email. I'm sorry I'm not able to be there.
Why not give him a standing ovation?
I hope this will generate discussion.
Yeah.
This feedback will help me improve arguments. So, thank you.
That's all right. That's the power of technology. When here in Eifuna, if you have any question or comments, you can write it down. We'll transmit it to him. You have questions or remarks, you can put it down. We'll transmit it to him. That was Professor Aminu Mama from the University of Manchester, United Kingdom, taking us on African philosophy to the rescue. It will take for a global pandemics. That was the paper we have just listened to. Our next keynote presenter is our own professor, Chukwumerije Okereke, who is the director of Center for Climate Change and Development, EIFUNA. We are trying to contact him to present this paper.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Prof. Can you come online, please?
I am already online.
Professor Chukwumerije Okereke, Director, Center for Climate Change and Development, EIFUNA. His topic is Green and Sustainable Post-COVID-19 Recovery in Africa. Professor Okereke, you can come online, please.
Can you see me? I can hear you.
Yes, sir. The floor is open for you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I would like to thank you all again for the invitation to give this keynote speech. We are running well behind in time, so I will try and keep my intervention very short. I want to discuss with you the topic of green and resilient post-COVID recovery for Africa. And I'm standing on all the already established protocol. I want to make a very simple argument. And the argument is that the combined impact of climate change and COVID-19 puts Africa in a very precarious situation politically, socially, and economically. And that the combined impact of climate change and COVID represents, in my view, one of the most significant challenges facing Africa today. the way that Africa responds to these two pressures or combined challenges will shape the future of Africa in decades to come. However, these two challenges present some opportunities to restructure and reconfigure African economic, political, and social systems if African leaders and the intelligentsia are able to harness the opportunity. Now, let me start with climate change. In terms of climate change, Africa is in a very precarious condition. Although the global warming that human beings have caused from the turn of the Industrial Revolution to now is about 1 degree centigrade, the warming of Africa is actually more than that, the mean warming. And that is particularly because of Africa's geographical location. And if you project into the future, depending on the model that you use, you see that Africa will warm between 1.48 centigrade to about 4.63 centigrade.
Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, wherever you are. It is an honor to be invited.
Somebody's talking over me. Hello. Hello. Can I get a response that I'm being heard?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, please go ahead. You are loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. So I was saying that the average global warming in Africa is actually much higher than the average global warming around the world because of Africa's peculiar geographical location. Now, to understand the impact of climate change is usually just not about the warming, it's also about the economic system, the resilience. And Africa, because of what we call a very low adaptive capacity, is not able to make the necessary adjustments to adapt to climate change. Now, according to some predictions, climate change is going to cost Africa between 100 billion to 460 billion per year from 2020 to 2050. This represents about 6% to 30% of Africa's GDP. In Nigeria, for example, flooding events are already responsible for the death of more than 3,000 people in the country. And the flooding event of 2012, according to government statistics, is responsible for a loss of about 16.3 billion US dollars. This is a huge amount and a significant portion of Nigerians' GDP. Take another example, on the same flooding. You see that 25 million Nigerians are at the risk of flooding. 400,000 in Lagos alone. And if you make some projections, you see using the popular climate change model, this number rises to about 3.2 million by 2040. Take another example, coastal inundation. 3,400 square kilometers of Nigeria is already inundated, and this number will rise to about 18,400 square kilometers at a projection of a sea level rise of about 1 meter. The consequence will be that by 2030, you will have no less than 32 million people that could potentially be displaced. And already, as some of you will know, Nigeria already accounts for a very high, significant number in terms of internally displaced people in the world. Then you look at agriculture, where 70% of Nigerians are engaged in agriculture, and agriculture accounts for about 21 to 26% of Nigerian GDP. 86% of Nigerian agriculture is not under irrigation, which means that it is very vulnerable to changes in weather patterns. And this is why climatic models in Nigeria suggest that by 2050, between 20 to 50% of agricultural loss will be experienced in Nigeria as a result of climate change. You can see that if you bring all of these forces together, you begin to get a sense of the scale of challenge that is confronting Nigeria. Desertification is another big issue. Climate change is helping to push more and more a part of the northern Nigeria into desertification. And the consequence is that the herders are moving more steadily down south in search of fodder for their cattle. And this, in combination with the drying of Lake Chad, which is also caused by climate change, are pressures that are helping to explain, among other things, the increased level of violence and insecurity that we are having in Nigeria. There is also a close relationship between climate change and health. As of 2000, Nigeria's overall health system performance was ranked 187 among 191 member states. So we are really rock bottom, if you like. And the incidence of climate change can exacerbate malaria, fever, and a huge number of other diseases such as typhoid and amoebiasis. So you can see that climate change has implication for health, implication for agriculture, implication for water resources, implication for food, implication for habitation, and also can cause displacement and insecurity. This is the impact, but there is another side to the coin, which is the flip side. And the flip side is actually that even if we are somehow able to find a way of managing these diverse impacts of climate change, Nigeria is still extremely vulnerable to the global green transition pressures and phenomenon that is already taking hold. You know that we have about 14 countries and 23 principalities that have already announced that they will not use diesel or gasoline-fueled car in their jurisdiction from 2035 onwards. This represents a huge chunk of the people that buy our oil. Nigeria, as you know, is a mono economy that is hugely dependent on oil resources. 86% or so of our foreign exchange earning comes from oil. Many of you who are familiar with what is happening around the world would know that there is already a pressure for many governments to defund gas and defund investment in oil. And in fact, as I speak with you, many multinational oil companies in Nigeria are already beginning to divest. Nigeria is struggling to attract money to open more oil and gas mines. And many of you would have heard the Vice President, Professor Osibanjo, crying out because of the lack of funding or investment to mine Nigerian gas. And Nigeria is one of the most most gas endowed country in the world. And so even if we're able to manage all these impacts of climate change, the fact that the rest of the world is moving away from fossil fuel and embracing the concept of green transition presents itself a potent challenge to Nigeria and indeed many other African economies. Calculations done by some of my friends and colleagues at Oxford University suggest that at a global 2 degrees carbon budget, Africa will suffer over $1.3 trillion worth of stranded assets. These are investments that already been made, but it's going to be wound down, and they will not be able to live to the end of their life cycle because there is pressure to bring down those investments and end them as a result of oil, as a result of green transition. Again, some of you will know that China recently announced that it's going to stop to fund coal fire power stations around the world. Now, remember that up to now, China alone was responsible for the funding of over 75% of coal stations around the world. So the pressure is on. And if the world experiences this green transition, you could find a situation where Nigeria will lose about 100 billion as a result of job losses related to oil. Calculations that we have seen show that about 12 billion will be lost to infrastructure. And also another 19 billion that will be lost as a result of the debts that that oil companies owe to banks. So there's a huge perturbance that you can expect in the financial market system, in infrastructure, in jobs and livelihood dimensions, occasioned by the green transition. So that is climate change. On top of this impact of climate change on the one hand, and the green transition pressure on the other hand, we now have the COVID pandemic that has been slapped upon Africa as well. Indeed, Africa has not experienced the number of deaths associated with climate change, with COVID, when you compare with other countries. But the economic consequences have been extremely devastating. COVID-19 has disrupted a long stretch of years of steady economic growth in Africa and triggered an unprecedented economic recession with far-reaching social development impact or consequences in the continent. Of course, people were saying that there will be dead bodies on the ground, on the street in Africa. That hasn't happened. But economies in Africa were growing at about 3% GDP before COVID-19, but most of them are now projected to suffer between 2% to 8% recession as a result of the pandemic. And indeed, my colleagues or friends at the African Development Bank indicates that the continent's economy may well contract between 107 to $237 billion by 2021. The region is expected to witness mass inflation. It's already occurring in Nigeria. You go to buy bread today, you get at 250 naira. You go the next day, they say it's 350 naira. This is almost kind of runaway inflation, up to 7%, alongside a dramatic fall in remittance on foreign direct investment in 2021. And so you see that whilst we were battling, or still battling with the issue of climate change, COVID has come now to almost compound this situation. There are some projections that indicate that up to 30 million jobs will be lost, and some actually say up to 49 million jobs. I did read in the newspaper one analysis by, I think, UNDP suggesting that up to 50% of people in the informal economy suffered major job loss in Nigeria as a result of COVID. So in the UK, we used to say that this is a double whammy situation. People often talk about 2020 being the year of COVID, but actually, that's almost a wrong expression. We need to be talking about the decade of COVID because the impact is still ongoing. And there are what we call the first order impacts, the second order impacts, and the third order impacts. So for example, in the realm of economy, the first order impact will be a drop in your GDP or drop in trade balance, which may worsen, a loss of job and livelihood, wealth depletion, increased health and related spending. But then there's a second order impact that has to do with domestic supply chains collapsing, economic activity stalling, increased non-formal activity. And then there may even be a third order effect, such as recession, increase in debt, and financial distress. So if you look at Nigeria, for example, COVID is one of the reasons why we have borrowed significant amount of money since the beginning of 2020. And if many of you who have a good understanding of the economics and the management system in the country will know that Nigeria will still borrow more money. I think we are now in a situation where we are using up to 85% of our money to service debt. So that is grossly unsustainable. So because I promised to be very short, I could develop some of these arguments in much more depth, but I don't want to do that. Let me now turn to some of the opportunities that the situation presents. You know, the funny thing about life is actually that some of the most important challenges you will find in life can also represent some of the most important opportunities. It turns out that actually Africa and indeed Nigeria have some comparative advantages when it comes to dealing with the twine problem of climate change and COVID-19. And this is why in my center at the university, the Center for Climate Change and Development, I've been working very hard with a number of our partners across the world, emphasizing the need for a green, resilient recovery for Nigeria and indeed Africa. Let me itemize very quickly 3 or so core areas that can provide the trust for this green recovery. The obvious frontline candidate has to be green energy. I think Professor Nebo will be speaking perhaps immediately after me, and he possibly might be able to go into more detail on this, given his previous role as Minister for Power. But when people say that Nigeria or Africa is a dark continent, it can speak to the color of our skin, but it can also speak to the amount or number of people that are still not connected to modern electricity supply. The worst in the world, where many countries are about 40%, 25%, 30% connected. And many of those that are connected don't actually enjoy the steady supply of electricity. COVID-19 recovery policies presents an opportunity to combine climate action with the effort to solve this perennial energy problem in the continent by scaling up the effort to generate both on-grid and off-grid electricity through modern non-renewable sources like solar, wind, tidal, geothermal sources for green energy investments as a pivotal action in promoting climate resilient development and also a healthier situation. Actually, some of my friends in the IEA have calculated that Africa has enough sun and wind to generate all the energy it needs and actually also export to Europe. There is notable progress in this area in the realm of clean development, clean energy in Africa. Professor Nebo, I think, championed some of those. but overall, the progress remains slow. Clean energy investment has a multiplier effect on other sectors for African economic advancement, including job creation. Africa's recovery effort are set to benefit more from low carbon energy sources such as solar and hydro, for example, for agri-production, industrialization, etc. So critical investments in energy to address energy poverty for more than the 620 million people on the continent that are still unconnected to modern electricity has the potential for unlocking clean growth pathways that are reliable and sustainable and help Africa to bounce back in a sustainable way. The second area has to be agriculture, investment in green agriculture. This is crucial. You remember I did mention that in Nigeria, up to 70% people are involved in agriculture, and that this accounts for about 26% of our GDP. It's interesting, oil, everybody's talking about oil, 86% of our foreign exchange earning, but actually employs less than 0.1% of the population and accounts for less than 0.9% of our GDP. But agriculture is the area where we need to be investing our energy. Scaling up investment in climate-smart agriculture should be a priority for all actors in Africa, including the university. Ebonyi State is well noted as an agricultural state. FUNAI, given its presence in Ebonyi State, should be blazing the trail and in green recovery with emphasis on agriculture, just as FUNAI is blazing the trail in a way in green energy. One of the few universities in Nigeria, if not the only university in Nigeria, that is 24/7 supplied by green energy. And when I'm done with speaking, if you like, you can clap for FUNAI on that basis. But we need to now replicate that in the area of green agriculture. And those of you who are in the management sciences have a role to play to connect with the people in agriculture, to come up with market models, finance models, management models that will be able to help the university to scale up its existing cooperative ventures in agriculture. But this is the model that the entire North Nigeria should also be embracing. One of the most important ways in which climate change is affecting development and livelihood in Africa is through its impact on agriculture. I've already told you about the 86% of agriculture in sub-Saharan Africa that is rain-fed. And when food systems are supplied by rain-fed agriculture, even moderate changes in rainfall or precipitation or pattern will have huge negative impact on productivity. In Europe, less than 5% of agriculture is outside of irrigation. In some countries like Nigeria, we see that there is already growing hunger as a result of climate change, and it is going to get worse unless we take action. And then the third place I want us to be focusing emphasis is on green transportation. Up to 25% of Nigerian emission and African emission is still comes from transportation. And the idea that 90% of our goods should be freighted by road is a misnomer. We have Nigeria, for example, which is about 5 or so times the size of England, having just about 5,000 kilometers of rail. You compare that to the United Kingdom, that, as I said, is about 4 times smaller than Nigeria. It has about 17,000 kilometer rails, out of which about 5,000 are electrified. We must invest massively in green transportation. And by the way, why do we always have those KKs in the campus? Why can't we encourage our students to ride bicycles? From phase 2 to phase 1 of FUNAI, you can ride bicycles quite easily there. And we need to begin to really model Funai as a green university and encourage our students to be more, you can be more active than jumping keke all the time and wasting money on fuel. The same applies to the broader Nigeria and Africa. You see all our cities in Africa that many of them don't even have walkways, pedestrians, let alone where you can ride your bicycle. And yet if you come to London, you see the Prime Minister Boris Johnson riding to work with bicycle. You see the Prime Minister for the Netherlands going to work with bicycle. So we need to really come down and begin to design our cities and our transportation system in general to become greener. And finally, we need to invest in digitization. I do not have time to develop this because I promised you I wanted to be quick. So thanks very much for the opportunity. This is a very crucial topic. We need to develop more of our conversation around this area, because if we don't get it right in how we try to bounce back or address the issue of climate change and bounce back from COVID recovery, then we will be lost forever. Thank you.
Yeah, so I was saying, if you have any question or comments, you can write it down and we transmit it to the presenter so that he'll provide us the answers. So thank you very much, Professor Chukwumerije, for being with us. We are getting into the third keynote. We could have taken the third keynote speaker, but the ICT is having problem with the lecture. So we shall transmit it to the participants as soon as they are done with it. AOC to come and speak on the arrangement for the technical session.
Thank you very much. Distinguished colleagues and conferees. Once again, we want to inform us that the next keynote speaker may not be coming up, but all these presentations will assure you that you get them. You will get the copy of the third presenter because the video is so poor. And again, we are running out of time. So we want to go into technical section, but then we would want us to give the technical unit 5 minutes. You can go stretch yourself while they mount the laptop. We are going to use here for the 4 technical sessions. Track 1, enterprise and entrepreneurship. Track 2, marketing, human resource management track. Track 3, accounting stroke financial management track. And track 4 is economy stroke environmental track. So please, by now you must have, I'm sure you must have gotten some email and you know the tracks you belong to. From this point, as we reconvene, want to announce to distinguished colleagues that are joining us online, you will be required to join through the track link that's already with you. We may still flash it now, Please, you can help us, technical unit, to flash the link. So as we could see that. And if you are here and you don't know the track where you belong to, you can meet us. So as we show you from the schedule of technical section, for you to know the tracks where you belong and the link you need to click. Because at the end of this section, we drop the link we are using now. Each technical section has identified unique link. So for you to join where your paper is, or any of the units you want to join, you have different links. So on this note, we want to break for just 5 minutes to allow them to mount the sections. We have one here, then one may be here, while another group will sit as we are sitting, then the projector will face here. Because we are going to use webcam laptop, we may not need PA system because that may constitute some noise, interruptions. So we believe that this place will be enough for us to have the 4 technical sections, and they are going to run concurrently. We trust God that we'll be able to finish the papers we have. Thank you very much. As we proceed on 5 minutes break, stretch yourself, and those people that will be chairing the sections, please, you get ready as well as the rapporteurs. Okay, we'll be going for lunch by 3:30. By 3:30, as we reconvene, we will start. By 3:30, we go for lunch. So as when we come back, we finish and we go. Thank you very much.
2021 with the theme SDGs and COVID-19, Mainstreaming Resilience and Sustainable Economic Transformation in Africa. Venue, Theatre Arts Auditorium, AE Funai. Date, October 13th to 15th, 2021. Lead paper presenter, Professor Aminu Maman, Professor of International Management and Development, University of Manchester, United Kingdom. Keynote speakers are Professor Chukwumerije Okereke, a climate change governance and international development expert and director, Center for Climate Change and Development, AE Funai, Professor Chinedu Nebo, former Vice Chancellor, University of Nigeria, Nsukka, and the Federal University, Oye Ekiti, former Minister of Power, Federal Republic Nigeria, Professor Solabomi Ajibolade, Professor of Accounting and the Head of Department of Accounting, University of Lagos, Nigeria. Host, Professor Femi Adeyeye, Dean, FMS, AE Funai. Chief host, Professor Sunday O. Elom, Vice Chancellor, AE Funai. For further inquiries, please contact Dr. Nelson Okor, Chairman, Conference LOC on 080 35 38 7132. Faculty of Management Sciences, Alex Ekweme Federal University, Ntufu Alike, AE Funai, Ebonyi State, Nigeria, organizes her first international conference, FMS 2021, with the theme SDGs and COVID-19, Mainstreaming Resilience and Sustainable Economic Transformation in Africa. Venue, Theatre Arts Auditorium, AE Funai. Date, October 13th to 15th, 2021. Lead paper presenter, Professor Aminu Maman, Professor of International Management and Development, University of Faculty of Management Sciences, Alex Ekweme Federal University, Ntufu Alike, AE Funai, Ebonyi State, Nigeria, organizes her first international conference, FMS 2021, with the theme SDGs and COVID-19, Mainstreaming Resilience and Sustainable Economic Transformation in Africa. Venue, Theatre Arts Auditorium, AE Funai. Date, October 13th to 15th, 2021. Lead paper presenter, Professor Aminu Maman, Professor of International Management and Development, University of Manchester, United Kingdom. Keynote speakers are Professor Chukwumerije Okereke, a climate change governance and international development expert and director, Center for Climate Change and Development, AE Funai, Professor Chinedu Nebo, former Vice Chancellor, University of Nigeria, Nsukka, and the SDGs and COVID-19, mainstreaming resilience and sustainable economic transformation in Africa. Venue, Theatre Arts Auditorium, AE Funai. Date, October 13th to 15th, 2021. Lead paper presenter, Professor Aminu Maman, Professor of International Management and Development, University of Manchester, United Kingdom. Keynote speakers are Professor Chukwumerije Okereke, a climate change governance and international development expert and director, Center for Climate Change and Development, AE Funai, Professor Chinedu Nebo, former Vice Chancellor, University of Nigeria, Nsukka, and the Federal University, Oye Ekiti, former Minister of Power, Federal Republic Nigeria, Professor Solabomi Ajibolade, Professor of Accounting and the Head of Department of Accounting, University of Lagos, Nigeria. Host, Professor Femi Adeyeye, Dean, FMS, AE Funai. Chief host, Professor Sunday O. Elom,
gbogbo wọn ti sá lọ, kò tí ì sẹ́ni tó dé yẹn tó sá kúrò ń bẹ̀.
ẹ wá dúró dé mi ní fámìlì ní yàrá òsì lẹ́yìn tí a rẹ̀ yàrá òsì wá dúró dé mi pẹ̀lú síbẹ̀ ní abẹ́òkúta.
Hello. Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Please, I noticed that for my panel, there's no moderator there. I don't know if the section has started.
Yeah, I was in the central media while the lead speakers were about two lead speakers had presented their papers. But I had a problem with my network here. I went off. So I'm
Are you
coming
part
back.
of the staff there or you're a participant?
No, I'm a participant.
Okay. I think you should try logging into the section your paper falls into. They are done with this place. I just came in to see if there's anyone I can speak with.
Yeah, I think this is supposed to be this is the space given to my own paper. I'm in stream 4. I mean, what did they call that thing? Yeah, group 4.
Just confirm.
Oh, let me confirm it as. Thank you.
èmi àti host nìkan ló wà bẹ́ẹ̀ bọ̀ ní bẹ́ẹ̀ dànù.
Consign that man and his creature. For instance, maybe I steal from someone. Knows between I stole from someone, not from God. A man can judge, but there are certain cases peculiar to that person vis-a-vis God. If I killed somebody now, I've hurt people. It's not just between me and God. It's also between me and those people that I hurt. So a verdict can be taken upon me for doing that action. But if I decide to marry a second wife and I'm not fit enough to marry a second wife, and I keep her under a certain constraint, as long as she adopts to that constraint, even though I'm doing something bad to her, she's able to absorb it and spend the rest of her life with me. That is between me and God. Another human being, it's between me for doing injustice to her and God. Another human being cannot come and see me, as long as that woman does not complain. If I do injustice to her, God will be the one to take the ultimate right from her, not another human being.
Hello. Hello.
How are you?
Let me run. Somebody's coming.
Okay, now. Okay.
So I'll come tomorrow. I know you are not still half of that.
Oh God, that person they just Friday they give us here.
Eh?
I said the other person was gisting, but someone is talking and.
Okay, are you hearing me now?
Yeah, I am.
So what is happening?
So it's like they're on break, huh?
Eh?
Because I've checked all the tracks now. Nobody is there.
Okay, all the tracks.
I checked all the tracks and nobody is there.
Where do you go to the tracks from the screen?
I log out to go to another track.
Okay, you log out.
I log out, go to another track, check and all of that. You know, unlike static, you can just from here navigate.
Move to another.
But here you have to check out.
You have to leave the screen first.
You have to leave and then if I log out and log in again.
So I just called Madam, say I told her to, we are having issue with our network too. She said we should keep on trying. So and I said to, in case we could not join, what will happen? So now that we are able to join, let them come and let's do whatever we want to do before the network mess up again.
That's the funny part of it.
Honestly, and this past 3 already.
I don't think these presentations can be taken all today.
Eh?
I don't think this presentation can be taken all today.
No.
Because you know we have about 14 papers to be presented in this group.
In this group, have you?
By the schedule.
So if me I present my own, I will log out. I will go with that.
For me, where I get 2 papers, what I want to do, may I die?
You will wait now.
Now for you. You know this solidarity for me.
So
me, I wish I can just present the 2 papers at the same time.
No, you can't do it at the same time.
No, what I mean is present and then present the second one.
No, what you can do is that present, let somebody else come in, then you can come in again.
So if I'm the only person there now, I think I should be able to present.
Even the other group, there's nobody having.
So I told you I checked and it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Ah, wow.
Let me mute my speaker.
Now that the network is on, just please come up and let us do something. Abi, I should just present my own to you so that you communicate to them for me.
No problem. I will present to me. I will take care of it.
And
then I'll ask you questions.
Tell them that I present to.
I will tell them that you are presented. But for now, make you off your video, off your mute, and stay calm. I don't go without the wait.
Hello, Dr. Abila. Are you hearing me? Hello? Hello?
Yeah, I heard you. You know, I decided to just mute myself.
Okay. Madam was saying that if you connected, I said we are there already. They should answer us.
You called her?
She called me.
Tell her we are connected. In fact, let me call her. I've not told her about the outcome of my Viva.
Okay.
Let me call her.
She said, I said we are there already waiting for them. They should come up and answer us.
Yeah.
I think they are both coming up.
All right. The campus media is up, so I think we are.
Who is there? Who is there?
Dr. Bond.
Yeah.
I think they are connecting us. I can see the.
Yes. Okay. Come see I'm busy. So see you on Monday. How do you feel this?